actually started was like from the Greek medicine that began from the 15th century, like and went until end of like 18th century. So the Western medical science basically inherited a lot of existing ideas from this antiquity of the medical science, like traces its roots directly to the Greeks. But the epic poems like the Odyssey offer like insight on the ancient medical practices before the time of like Hippocrates. So the recurrent theme in the poem is that God, if displeased, sent plagues and epidemics and illnesses to the humanity, what we are facing in today's world, like with all these like pandemics and epidemics that are happening. And historians like have mentioned that the medieval world valued the sanctity of church. Then actually the Western approach, the philosophers, doctors like Aristotle, Hippocrates, and Avicenna used pulse for variations in the health and disease to assess the patient. So it started like long ago, even when there wasn't even a mention of pulse in Ayurvedic history. So then it spread it across to the Arab-Islamic medicine from the 8th century till 14th century, it was there. So the Islamic medicine is the one actually who preserved and systemized and developed this medical knowledge of classical antiquity, we call as pulse, including those of Hippocrates, Dioscorides. It integrated concepts of the ancient Greek, Roman, Persian, and the Indian traditions of Ayurveda. So they were called like the pulse diagnosticians. The Hippocrates, Aristotle, Erasistratus, Galen, and Avicenna was the main one who actually sort of evolved this examination of the pulse called pulsology. So Avicenna first wrote that the pulse is like feeling the pulse is trickier, which can be used for the person who is in love sickness, basically, and which relates to the emotional state of the people. And the first to describe the pulse in health and disease was Galen. But after like refining all these like theories, the Galen theories on the pulse and the correct explanation of pulse was like more to be called as a pulsation. In the words of like Avicenna, every pulse like comprises of two moments and two pauses. So thus expansion, pause, expansion, pause. So that's how he defined the pulses. And in ancient times, Galen, as well as the Chinese physician, enormously used pulse. Was the only unique type of pulse for every organ of the body and every disease. The Chinese physicians used to use this as a main diagnostic tool. And Avicenna examined the pulse using the wrist, and this is still being used till date. And this was the pathy that actually continued till date. But in between, even though the Chinese were considered the great masters in pulse diagnosis, but even the classical antiquity used the pulse in health and disease to guide them in assessing the condition, medical conditions or anything. And Avicenna discusses pulse diagnosis extensively in his book, like Canon of Medicine. And he said that Avicenna studied the Chinese system of pulse diagnosis and based his theory and in his treatise on the pulse, which he called it as Rizoli Nabzia. Avicenna said like, pulse may be of a different shape, like and a twindle shape, too shock, like long, trembling, short, small, slow, and soft, increased, nervous, and empty. So the pulse was assessed not only in terms of whether it was weak or strong, slow, irregular, but also, for example, whether it was large or small and hard or soft. the physicians considered that they would identify problems ranging from dropsy, diphtheria, pregnancy, and anxiety. So just wait a minute. Can you have a glass of water? Yes. So the pulse diagnosis, like I had six, they mentioned in Chinese like as 6 positions and 3 levels, which is Kun, Guan, Qi. And then there was like all these based on the meridians, basic 5 elements, and quite a lot of description, which has been already given by a lot of other speakers. And then the important assessment was like the health of the key in general, and the relationship of yin and yang, and relative state of deficiency and excess, like whether an exterior pathogen is present. So with Ayurvedic pulse, like we all understand, we look at Vata, Pitta, Kapha, and it should, when it should be checked, and what it is at the superficial touch and what it is at the deep touch. And then accuracy of pulse examination depends on the factors, the awareness of the individual, and to understand and interpret the subtle nature of the vibrations. So there is the proficiency of Nadi Pariksha is gained by alertness and long clinical practice and mentor. So there is a lot of like reference to the vital flow of life or energy, which passages the channels of circulation all over the body. And so taking Nadi is more than counting the beats. So the health and functioning of the whole mind-body constitution is determined basically on the balance of these 3 biological humus. So it's largely based on the pulse examination, and it reveals the physical characteristics of the pulse and are interpreted along with prognosis, which gives the understanding of the underlying cause. So there is, in modern terminology now, a relation with sphygmology in the pulse, like so, and there is a lot of like present scientific studies that certainly give a new light of hope in the direction and advancement of Ayurvedic pulse lore, and a good asset to this science. So we basically, there were clearly defined methods of pulse diagnosis in the traditional medicines that can lead to reason well-defined syndrome determination. And that's what the significance of pulse diagnosis in modern or ancient times. Can you diagnose accurately, or advent of advanced technological medical diagnostics, or should its use be limited to confirmed diagnosis? Does the pulse diagnosis add the critical information? Is the training in pulse diagnosis quite limited? Do you need any experienced practitioner to check? And its relation to the quantum physics and Eastern philosophy, like who knows what's the basic stuff everything made of, relation between the parts and the whole, and how the objects and the properties emerge, or role and locus of humans. Like so, a major paradigm change may change the rules, raise up new questions, categories and distinctions. Maybe old controversies between science and humanities, Western and Eastern thought, just disappear. So basically the reality is not mechanical. There is a room for the activity of consciousness in human beings. So the quantum physics might be used to describe the formation of material and matter and the mental phenomena. So the mental states need not to be identified with brain states, and allows known local connections. So yeah, so there is a lot of interpretation and Eastern ideas, like towards idealism and parallels and the similarities, like mysticism. So it provides, like Indian philosophy provides the realistic ideas concerning interplay between the consciousness and the matter. So there is a plurality that emerges from immutable bases, and the consciousness, and humans are conscious, like evolving beings who are embedded into the corporeal layers of nature. And there is a lot of evidence and a study being done relation between the mind, matter and consciousness in Indian philosophy, talking about Sankhya, Vedanta, Tantra, and potent frameworks to produce like mental technologies. And so when we talk about Sankhya, we know that's enumeration, the evolution of consciousness into the material nature. And we talk about all those 24 tattvas, and the Purusha, the Prakriti, Manas, like Buddhi, Ahankar, Sattva, Rajtam, and the Brahma. So basically the flow of consciousness and the pulse, like how it's all associated, like the Prakriti is basically the absolute nature and the Purush is the matter. So the potentiality that the feeling of I am in every organism, and the pulse is the individual psychophysiology and a flow of consciousness represented by the three doshas. So yeah, so that's all about consciousness and its role in nature. So material aspect, conscious aspect, realm of life, and celestial elements in the brain. We talk about Ida, Pingla, and Nadi, about like 72,000 Nadis are there. Like, so we just like look at the right nostril, Pingla, and left Ida, and the middle one is the Sushumna. So we relate the pulse with the celestial elements, like, and there is a lot of like variation between the Nadi with the modern concept. Like we are getting to a point where there could be a lot of like more scientific study could be done relating the pulsation, and even with the modern doctors are now accepting this. So that's my like a talk about like just introducing like how there is a lot of like a significance about the pulse, like for the diagnosis and assessment, not only in the traditional way, but a lot of like diseases and organs, like even in my practical life, like in my clinic, I have assessed a lot of clients, like, and I've diagnosed their thyroid conditions, or ladies who are pregnant, like in the 3rd month. After assessing, I can tell without any scanning, like whether it's a boy or a girl, like a lot of things that I inherited even from my family. Like I'm the 5th generation in the family, but I learned from my grandfather. And but I think like there is a lot of like relevance and a lot of yearly timely practice that actually takes you to develop that expertise. So you have to basically go through a lot of like different hands and different people, your family, starting with your family, yourself, and then getting it out like into the clients. Like, so that's all I wanted to say. So thank you very much, Sanjay and Naveen, for giving me opportunity to be speaking today. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. It was wonderful journey of the history of pulse diagnosis. I really appreciate that it has been well accepted fact that these pulsating organs in the body had ever been since the humanity has arrived on this planet. It was accepted that there is some relationship of these pulsating organs and the life. And this was there time immemorial, not only in the Greek medicines, but also in the Indian context also. The similar phenomena has been observed in Vedas, right from Rig Veda. It is seen in Charka. We normally feel that Charka has not said anything about pulse in
Yes, yes.
specificity, but it is not so. The Indriya
No.
Sthana has specifically been devoted to those elements which are for the investigations. And if you recall, the setting of the Indriya Sthana is prior to Nidana Sthana. And that
Yes.
gives you an understanding, innate understanding of how the tactile perceptions are to be used. The 3rd Adhyaya of Indriya Sthana gives you very specificity of the tactile elements. And in there, they categorically said, even Charka has mentioned, that if Mandyagata, Spandanam, Aspandanam, Parasuriti Vidyat, if the pulsating factor in the neck, and then when Chakrapani elaborated, it said it's on the Gala Parshva. That is specifically an indication of carotid. And even today, if something happens in emergency, the first pulse which is observed is carotid. And
Yes,
one
yes.
who was aware about the carotid and its functioning and its relationship with the life, who can give elaborate understanding of the clinical methodology, how can he not give any specification about pulse? He has given the pulsation and its entire impact on the pulse diagnosis. But as Indian traditions are, everything written in coded form. So
Yes.
we have to decode it. And the first try of decoding was done in Sharangara 11th century.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
Galen, and prior to Galen, there are certain references, and those were prominent till 17th century in modern medical science. But
Yes.
after 17th century, after the advents of the various gadgets, this pulse diagnosis has lost its own stature in Western
Yes.
medicine,
Yes.
because
I agree.
now the pulse has
Yes.
gone to the nurses, not to the doctors, and
Yes.
we at India has preserved that particular knowledge and tried to develop it in a better sense. I am very thankful to remind us about all the throat tension. We would have been more happy if you would have shared some of your thoughts of the traditional family knowledge you have gathered here. But thank you very much for what you have shared. I may request Dr. Thangavellu sir to provide us with his wisdom. Thank you.
Namaskar ji, can
Sir,
you,
please.
I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can.
Thank you, sir. Now, greetings to all of you from the university town of Cambridge, old university town. We are celebrating many centuries, 800 years plus. And I take this opportunity to thank Sanjay ji. Sanjay ji is very special to us, and we feel honored to be connected with Sanjay ji doing this amazing thing. Also, my special thanks to Naveen Joshi ji for bringing us all together here on this platform. Now, thank you again for giving me the chance to be at the very tail end of this session, because it's given me an overview of all the presentations. And while going through this, I was just preparing a few thoughts, and what I found quite surprising is that my slides, which I had prepared independently of all the discussions, they come very correctly at the right time. So I hope when I go through the slide, it will resonate particularly with Sanjay ji's comments made just now. And I want to highlight one or two points here. I want to, number one, highlight why this is important, why this initiative is important. I've been discussing with Sanjay ji about extending this initiative to form much larger network across the world. So I want to spend a little time on that. Number two, I wish to spend a little time looking at that foundations, which is the deeper foundations. Where does this knowledge and this desire and this understanding, where does it come from? And why are we revisiting it now? I want to give a little bit about that. And the third point I hope I can convey while I'm talking is about where we should go, the future signs for this stuff. This is very important. Is there anything known in physics, the physics that we know? This town where I'm seated is very special because this is the home, we feel the home of many, many aspects of fundamental physics. This was where the electron was discovered. This is where, prior to the discovery of the electron, James Clerk Maxwell gave us the whole theory of electromagnetism. This is the town where DNA evolved. The whole structure of DNA was solved here. And sitting here, it feels a great honor to be drawn into a discussion of a phenomenon that is being used routinely in practice, like Vinita ji, or like we had a lovely contribution by Ishan ji, you know, the clarity that is given there. The beauty of how he explains everything in Hindi, which is derived from Sanskrit, and the elegance of the science that comes through that is lost when we translate things. So before I set off point number one, I wish to do my presentation in English, if I may.
Please.
हमारी हिंदी थोड़ा कमजोर है, बातचीत में तो चलता है, मगर इस टाइप की जो detailed explanations जहाँ चाहिए उसमें अगर अंग्रेजी में कर सकते हैं थोड़ा आसान
Please, you can definitely, sir.
Thank you. And I start by saying, why are we in this position? Why this excitement? Why are we excited about visiting ancient Indian sciences? Here in the UK Parliament, we have something called the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Indian Traditional Sciences. This might be the only parliament in the whole world where we have a parliamentary group discussing India's traditional sciences. As far as I know, even the Indian Parliament does not have a group. You will find the details in our parliamentary group website. We have lords and baronesses and members of parliament who come together and we discuss all these things. So we feel the wealth of knowledge in the Indian systems is so rich and deep. We feel it must come and become part of mainstream science. So that is point number one, that we in UK, in the parliament, we have a group. And we are inspired by what is happening in India, and we are following this very closely, and we want to bring it into the mainstream. And what is that mainstream? I will switch to my slides to give you an idea of where this mainstream is and why this excitement about India's traditional sciences. Another point I want to mention before I go to my slides is that in April 2 years ago, April 2018, Prime Minister Modi came to the Commonwealth Leaders Summit here in the UK. And together with His Highness Prince Charles, they unveiled a wish to have the first Center of Excellence. We call it ACE, for Ayurveda Center of Excellence and the Center for Traditional Sciences. So that wish has already been presented to the community, and we not only have an all-party parliamentary group, we also have a wish to develop Ayurveda Center of Excellence here in the UK. It might be the first one in the world once again. Sorry if we are ahead of India, but this is our wish. So it is within this context that we are doing, that I'm going to present here. Now, can I share my slide?
Please, sir.
Share my screen.
Please, you can share your slides.
Okay. This is where we are in health sciences. So up here is an annual event that happens in Austria in a place called Gastein. And the theme for this year's event is it's a very interesting, provocative title, Dancing with Elephants, a new partnership for health, democracy, and business. And it's a very provocative title, which has hidden within it a deep message. It's left to you to imagine who these elephants are and what is this dance that is happening with the elephants. But what is clear is that there is a call for a new partnership for health, democracy, and businesses. There is a feeling that things are not going correctly in the world. Something is wrong. And this touches also the world of health. You can see details of this event, and you can register at this event at this website. This is an annual event where the thought leaders in health come together. The other big change and the thinking that is going on is this United Nations development goals. We feel there is a lot, people who feel there is a lot wrong with the world today. And they have distilled this into 17 goals. This is 17 goals that they want to achieve. And in here, you will find many, many important indicators that are relevant to what we are discussing in terms of sciences, traditional sciences, in terms of reviving these traditional sciences, in terms of health. There are many, many aspects, education, health, teaching new skills to people. whether it is from contemporary science or whether it's from the ancient sciences. We want to educate people and we want to teach them how to live in this world in sustainable ways. So all these points are top on the minds of policymakers everywhere in the world, especially the leading economies of the world. And this must be the case also in India. Now, we have reached a time in the history of this world where we are facing an unprecedented crisis, infections. Can we turn this around? Can health, instead of viruses, become that infection? And I feel we can. And this challenge is distilled in this whole term called health. Health is understood most elegantly in the Indian systems. And we are saying in the past few decades, we have seen an overgrowth of this thing called healthcare. It has become a business, a very lucrative business, a very dangerous business, and a very lethal business. Can we shift it away towards well-being? Well-being is described best in the Indian systems. We have minds going from the time of Buddha, 600 BC or before, all the way to Nagarjuna, 1,000 years later, the second Buddha, who talks about the Panchadasha Prakara, the 15 signs of health and well-being. Can this be brought into our discussions to show that there is something called health? It is available to all, and how can we make this shift from where we are today, which is called healthcare, which in fact is the commoditization of disease, to well-being, which is also, I want to use the word commoditization because many people understand only phrases like this. I call the commoditization of health. What would it look like? It would look like the re-establishment of health. We must learn how to measure and audit health, learn how to use this to prevent disease. And much of what we are doing today in this wonderful session, the second session that Sanjay ji has hosted, is showing us how to quantitate, how to measure, how to audit health. By taking a simple Nadi measurement, we are measuring health. And can we turn this into a new way of thinking about health and well-being? When we look at the larger Europe and the European Union, there is a shift. There is a doctor who's the new president of the European Union, European Commission, Frau von der Leyen, a German lady, a German doctor, a German MD, a mother of 7, who seems to have so much energy. She's in charge of the president of the European Commission. And this is her call. This is in terms of COVID-19. We will stop nothing to save lives. And this is her call for the future of health and healthcare. There are discussions going on in Parliament. The next 6-year program and the funding for the Parliament is scheduled to begin the 1st of January next year. Monies have been allocated for the budgets. The discussions are going on. Not a large amount of money compared to what is spent for healthcare, the expensive healthcare, but these are monies that have to be used in certain ways. And one of the call is promotion of disease, promotion of health, prevention of disease, and healthy lifestyle. These are all messages coming very firmly established in Ayurveda, but those discussions don't happen here for whatever reason, maybe distance, maybe ignorance, maybe lack of knowledge about our systems. But I feel these are things that Europe is ready for and will be reaching out to places like India and to scholars and practitioners like yourself to come and teach people in Europe how to look at health differently. So this is setting the background for where we are. at least starting 2021 for the 6 years. There'll be some funding, there'll be things, and we should see how to open dialogues with researchers. Now for the second part of my talk, which is taking us closer to the discussion today. I've put 3 figures here, and I use these figures to explain the challenges of the systems of medicine when we have to explain it to people who don't understand the Indian systems. So there are people here who have trained in Cambridge. We have a clinical school where students are taught medicine. But if I take any of the students and ask them, do you know anything about Nadis? They wouldn't know anything. Would you know about Ravi Shankar? They will all know something about Ravi Shankar. Do you know this person whose name Bolt? Everybody knows about it. And then I use this example to start a discussion. I say, well, here is a man who he's the fastest man alive. He runs 100 meters at under 10 seconds. And all the young students watch this. They have seen him run. They agree with this. They all know a little bit of music, and they all agree with this. And when I tell them that in India, this is how we understand the human body. In the ancient times, we knew how to divide the human body into these kind of geographic patterns of the human body. And they are not happy to accept this. They don't accept that there is something here. There is another way to understand the body, but they're quite happy to accept all this. So there is a bit of a problem here. There's a gap in the transitioning of knowledge. They're happy to understand these things, but not happy to understand these things. I then tell them, how many of you can run 100 meters? And in when I go into a classroom today, there are a lot of children who will not be able to run 100 meters non-stop. They have all come to study medicine. If I ask them, can you run 100 meters non-stop? There are many students there who will not. They cannot. They're just built that way. They haven't trained, they are not physically active, and they cannot. But they are willing to agree that there is somebody in the world who runs at under 10 seconds. The same with Ravi Shankar. And I say, you play the piano. You've heard of the sitar, you've heard of this man. Can you play the sitar? No. But you're happy to accept that there is somebody who plays the sitar. Yes. Now I move to the one on the left. How come you have a problem with this? There are people in India who do pulse diagnosis and can understand everything about you. What is the reason? You can't understand this. So there is a problem. And this is the problem we must try and resolve and what we should overcome. Now for us in India, when we go to different parts of India, this is what we see. This is ancient knowledge. This is Indian traditional science. I have shown on the left hand the position of stellar bodies in the sky at 7:58 p.m. on the 4th of April, 2024, about 4 years' time from now. This is how objects are going to be positioned in the sky. For me, this is very important. This is a macroscopic representation, a macroscopic representation of something else in the manifest universe. I will leave this to a side for a moment and move to what I have on the right-hand side. This is representation of the music, the ragas in the southern India, in the Carnatic music system. This representation was given to us relatively recently, and it's very mathematical. It's mathematical in that it takes a given space, and just like we have on the left-hand side, where you've taken a given space that we see, and it is divided symmetrically. into sections, and different notes are assigned to different sections, and you get an almost mathematical presentation of systems and music. One can see parallels in these two systems. Now I'll leave this aside and move on to the next slide. The mathematics that is used for representing this space, for me, is no different from the mathematics used in explaining the human body. We say desha, the concept of desha, which is understood in Ayurveda. Deha desha is this. We have a way to understand space. We have a way to understand the human body and the divisions. And there is not a subtle, but a frank connection between how the body is represented here and how music is set out, or for that matter, how we build houses, how we build temples, how we go about dividing space to make it useful. And much of this knowledge is based on our darshanas. So the two darshanas that are extremely important for us in this space that we are talking about, number one is Sankhya, and number two is Vaisheshika. Now, for me, I'm not a practitioner, I'm not an Ayurveda practitioner, but for me, the beauty of Ayurveda and the beauty of what you are doing today, I appreciate through the eyes of Sankhya and Vaisheshika. And for me, it is completely clear how these two, with as little as these two darshanas, maybe with a little bit of yoga, Kapila's Sankhya Sutras, Kannada's Vaisheshika Sutras, and Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. When we put all of this together, all this forms a logical, consistent body of how we divide space, how we, wherever that space is. I highlight here the term avyakt. I want to come back to this towards the end, I'll come back to this. But the clarity that is offered in our darshanas, particularly Sankhya, takes you back to understanding the dynamics of even the unmanifest. This is very important because there is no other body of knowledge and a system of philosophy that helps you appreciate this dynamic unmanifest, the avyakt. This term is so important for all of us in this space, particularly those who want to see the bridging of Western systems, Western philosophy and Eastern philosophy. Vinita ji mentioned very briefly about where those parallels are. And Vinita ji also mentioned about this Shushma and the Ida and the Pingala and how it all comes out. Now, all of these are very important. How did our ancients understand these things? And for me, this is the mysterious thing. For me, doing Nadi Pariksha is not a mystery because I understand it can be done. But how did they go on to divide and make these kind of divisions? You know, the Shiva Samhita talks about 35,000 nadis in the human body. You can divide it into so many little aspects of the human body. So that is my second bit. Now, I come to the third part of my presentation, which is why is this important? How does it connect with modern biology? And where is it that we want to form these bridges? And where do we want to make the bridges? And where do we guide future research based on this thinking that is rich in our system and a way of thinking that is rich in the Western systems? How can we bring these two together? Now, these look like very dense and busy images, But shown on the left is a schematic on how you make the human body and all the different cell types from the zygote, from as little as one cell. And all of us begin our life from one cell, a few microns across, and that entire logic is played out. Ayurveda talks about Prakriti, and Prakriti is such a fascinating concept with 6 aspects which contribute to formation or assigning Prakriti. I am a DNA biologist. I look at only the 2 concepts, the contribution of DNA from the father and the mother, and maybe a little bit of the epigenetics. Ayurveda's Prakriti concept puts 3 other dimensions into this, which is phenomenal. And we might be reaching a point in modern biology where we will have to look at other attributes to understand these aspects. Now, there is a lot of technology that is available now. If you look at this link here, you will have access to this paper and all these images and all the work that's being done to understand the human body, in terms of links between the organs, in terms of neurophysiology. How do all these things come about? And they are being analyzed at the finest resolution. What we are seeing at the finest resolution when we look at these dynamic processes that happen to form an embryo is that there is something more than what genes and proteins and cells can explain. There is a need to understand something more, not just the electrical circuits and the electrical fields around each cell. There is a deeper logic. Now, I want to dwell a moment on some of these figures. Perhaps it will be seen clearer in the next slide. Now, shown here is how an embryo forms. Now, for me, when I looked at it early on in my life, when I was just deeply involved only in biology and DNA, and these did not make sense. But when I revisit these images through the eyes of Panchabhuta Siddhanta, everything takes on an even more colorful explanation of how thousands of cells suddenly find the logic from the gel booth, how space is compartmentalized, how space is divided into finer units, how cells interact based on the logic offered by Sankhya, how structures evolve. All this takes on a whole new look. And the formation of the embryo, all of that we talk about today in terms of Nadi Pariksha, comes out of the senses that are formed in these little embryos. We deliver the human body. Many years later, we develop the logic that we understand. And what is incredible here is that by the time we are about 60 days of this fetus, this fetus has more than 90% of all the identifiable structures. This is about 4 centimeters in length. The entire logic that we are talking about and the mechanisms that I use, the senses that I used, on the structures for the senses, the fingertips that we use, are all formed in this embryo by week 4. Now, within this are different rhythms. The space is divided, the rhythms are divided, there are things that are happening, all of that, respecting all this, the schematic shown here, all respecting the laws understood in the Indian traditional sciences, in the darshanas, in the siddhantas. We had Basavaraj presenting something about meridians. A lot of people doing Ayurveda will say, well, what is the connection between this Chinese system that we have and our pulse diagnosis?
Sir, sorry to interrupt, sir.
Clearly.
Actually, we have only 3 minutes.
He shows how these 12 meridians point to how the body is connected and how you can assess things. I feel there is a lot of possibility of cross-fertilization with those machines, and understanding the Chinese representation of energies, the qi, as they call it, and the Indian representation of the three doshas and prana. This is an entire body for a whole new, not just a discussion, but a whole program of work that is worthy of many decades in the future. And I hope people in places like IIT Mumbai and the different IITs in India will open up their minds and the minds of faculties and minds of students to engage in this space. We are all happy to note that Jawaharlal Nehru University, JNU in New Delhi now has a program for Ayurvedic biology. I hope Sanjay ji and Joshi ji will enable these discussions with places like JNU so that we can start to have critical mass of teachers, critical mass of students, critical mass of minds who are conversant with all these areas. So understanding the human body, understanding the autonomic nervous system and how the different organs are connected, which is what you're doing in Nadi Pariksha. And what is it that we can learn from the skills that are there that Sanjay ji has brought together here? How can we start to open dialogues? And I think it's becoming very important that we do this because nobody else in the world has these skills. And nobody else has a university system that is open to this kind of thinking. And start asking questions about how we can optimize on the right-hand side I show here, the entry points of the different meridians and the connections with the nadis. So there will be, I sense, a little bit of friction between our, practitioners of Shuddha Ayurveda and practitioners who are in the hybrid space and practitioners in the medical area. But I think we have enough brain power here, and I think we have enough diplomacy and enough skills to bring all these people together so that we can enable a dialogue. Now,
thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Actually, we have a shortage of time.
Shortage of time.
As,
so I hope I have managed.
7 o'clock is already now. Actually, the meeting was planned up to 7 p.m. and it is started from 9 a.m. So it's a very long time. Now I request Dr. Sanjay Chhaje to.
I regret, sir, to keep you on such a late period. We thought that you will be an highlight of the entire program, and now to listen to you is making us more to listen more. Sometime else, we will definitely plan for, as per your convenience, full schedule for 2-3 hours to hear you.
पूरे घंटे के साथ हम सर आपको लेके आएंगे.
नहीं जी, मेरे मन में ये है जोशी जी, संजय जी और बाकी जो भी है हमारे साथ, मेरे मन में ये है कि take this seriously. Number one.
Serious. We are very serious.
चलेगा सर, इसको seriously लेंगे सर हम. आपको वादा करते हैं.
दूसरी चीज, जो भी हो आपके पास, everybody has a message, but give them freedom to evolve this into separate gharanas. Okay.
Yes.
जैसे हमारी म्यूजिक में जो घराना ना जी, उस टाइप का होनी चाहिए. तो महाराष्ट्र में आपके पास है, वसंत लाल जी के पास है कुछ, वनिता जी के पास है कुछ. So let us grow this. Let us keep them connected and don't
So maybe the gharana, sir, the surah are only 7.
So
and the Thata are only
exactly.
Ajit sir, अब आप एक बार final आप comment दे दीजिए.
Thank you very much, sir.
So, this is my wish that I congratulate all of you for doing this wonderful event. We are listening to all this. We want you to promote this and grow this further. There are many people watching this and many people listening to what you are saying, and let us expand this and keep the gharanas separate.
Yes. This will definitely go to the PM office and to Ayush Ministry, probably tomorrow morning. Because having a parliamentary committee, having a parliamentary committee on Indian sciences, if it can be there in United Kingdom, it should be there first in India. And this note will go definitely to the PM with the request to IIT Mumbai, because I am associated with IIT Mumbai as a mentor. So we will definitely take some of these projects in our forthcoming sessions. Thank you, Vinita ji. Thank you. Thank you,
most
everybody.
welcome.
Naveen ji, please
Satish ji,
conclude.
सर,
thank
बहुत
you
बहुत
so much.
धन्यवाद, बहुत
It
बहुत
was a
स्वागत।
pleasure and
आपको
thank
सुनने
you
का
so much.
हमें अभी
Thank you
और
so
भी
much, sir.
घंटे भर मौका चाहिए था, पर समय की कमी है सर, और हमने समय को 7 बजे तक नियंत्रित रखा था। आप सभी का बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद सर। थैंक यू सर हमसे जुड़ने के लिए, और हम फिर कभी ऐसा प्रोग्राम बनाएंगे तो आप ज़रूर आएंगे और आपका एक लंबा हम इसमें एक्सपीरियंस शेयर करेंगे। धन्यवाद
Sir,
सर।
I request you, Madan sir, to share your slides.
I will certainly,
अपनी
sir. I will
स्लाइड
send
जरूर
it to
शेयर
you.
करिएगा सर।
Please, sir.
इसके
ये अपना ग्रुप है, ग्रुप पे डाल दीजिए सर, प्लीज।
बिल्कुल जी, बिल्कुल बिल्कुल।
थैंक यू वेरी मच।
Yeah.